Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. This is an event organized by Alefba Group, especially the youth group within Alefba, and we are very excited to have hopefully one of several panels and discussions about to help our kids and the kids in our community with the college admission process. My name is Roshanek Roshandel. I used to be a professor computer science professor and chair of the computer science department at Seattle University. I changed jobs about a year ago, but I still remember a lot of the nuances of the college admission process. So I'm moderating the panel tonight, and I can try and answer questions that I know the answer to. But the superstars of our event tonight are our panelists. Who are all college students, recent high school graduates, or somewhat recent, not everybody is a recent college grad, but all college students with very impressive backgrounds and experiences. And we are very excited to have them here, and we thank them for accepting this invitation to join this panel and help everybody else with the process. So I think before we have prepared a set of questions that we are going to ask the audience, but ask the panelists. But this is a pretty open forum. So if you have questions, you can raise your hand and ask questions if it's related to the topic that's being discussed. At the very end, so we're going to go through a list of questions that kind of covers the admission process tonight, and then if you have questions, you can raise your questions in the chat. I'll moderate the chat window and ask those questions from our panelists. And at the end, we try to have a few minutes set out so that you can explicitly ask your questions. We're also asking everybody to keep their videos off, except for the panelists, so that we can have a view that shows the speakers of the event. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and let's get started. So first introduction. So we have four panelists here: Bahar Furutan, Bahar Buzarjanari, Kian Bidari, and Roya Naini. And I would ask everybody to just go and quickly introduce yourself, maybe talk a little bit about just a very brief introduction. Just tell us when you graduated high school, where you go to college, what majors you are studying, and maybe when you started college, just very briefly. And then we'll go to our list of questions. So I see Bahar right next to me, and maybe everybody can call the next person. So Bahar, go ahead, get started. Bahar Plutan, go ahead, get started, and then.
Okay, my name is Bahar, and I go to college at Santa Clara University. I'm a business major, undeclared, and my high school was Bellevue High, and I graduated in 2021, so last year, and I started college in September. And then Bahar, if you want to go.
My name is also Bahar. I graduated high school last year, so class of 2021, from Olympia High School. I'm currently in my first year at Yale University. Not fully sure on my major, but I think I will do psychology. Kian?
Hi, my name is Kian. Currently, I'm studying at the University of Washington in computer science. I graduated last year in 2021 at Texas High School. Yeah.
Great. Roya, are you online? Roya had some audio problems. I don't know if she's back online.
She comes in and out, but I think that's her speaker might still have problem.
Oh, she is. You are on mute, Roya. Can you introduce yourself if you can?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. My computer has audio issues often. Hi, I'm Roya, and I'm in my third year of school at Harvey Mudd College, which is an engineering school in Claremont, California, and I'm studying mathematical and computational biology.
Thank you very much, everyone, for the introduction. So basically, we came up with a list of questions that kind of, as I mentioned, cover the admission process. So I will ask a couple of questions in various categories like testing and college search and the prep work that goes into the process. Again, I want to ask the audience, you're welcome to ask your questions. That if you're talking about a particular topic that you have a question that's not getting answered, please ask. my goal is to just kind of do a round robin and ask, maybe you can, panelists, you can jump in if you you feel strongly about answering the question. You don't have to, not everybody has to answer every question, but if you feel like you have a good thing, good contribution to make, please do. And then sometimes I'll just pick at you. In the context of planning, I'd like to know when did you really start? I know that as a high school student, you think about the college process, but I want to know when you really start in earnest looking into things seriously and kind of planning and making lists and deciding what to do, and especially in terms of what you do in the summer and the fall quarter. So I hear a lot that people do some of the work in the summer because fall gets busy and you don't have a lot of time. So just help people navigate the summer and fall specifically. But if you did something before the summer and fall that you think it was really, really important and useful to be done early, please share that as well. Let's start with Keon. Go ahead.
Yeah, so for me, especially at my high school, it was integrated within the curriculum to start working on your college essay. So nearing the end of the year of junior year, I had already written out my college essay and had that reviewed within my with my English teacher. So I had a good college essay starting off. And then going into the summer, I had created a list of schools that I was thinking about going into through my tutoring sessions at C2 Education. So from there, I was able to build a solid list of schools that I was considering. And then I was able to see what essay prompts I had wanted to write to. And since I already had that essay already written out, I would modify the essay or create additional prompts in order to answer those questions. And then going back to those tutoring sessions and then refining those further for admission processes that would happen early on. I know, for example, UW was earlier in November, but there were also schools having the deadlines in January. So initially starting off with that essay and then later refining that in the face of these new admissions. And then also a good, I guess, thing to look out for going into senior year is contacting teachers that you had a positive experience with and seeing what qualities you want to shine within your application. So if you had certain teachers where you felt that you were very proficient within their class and there were qualities that shine that you want reflected in your application, it's best to write out emails and draft those out, asking them if they can write their essay for you, because certain schools would want that required for their application. So I would say those pieces are the most helpful within starting off early before doing your application.
Great, thank you. Who wants to go next? Roya, please.
Yeah, something that really helped me and my twin was practicing the SATs. So during the summer, we took a lot of practice exams. I think more than just, I guess, reading about the exam or talking to other people, I think the most useful thing is to practice with practice exams and just going through that over and over until you have a score that you're happy with. And I know a lot of people go and take the SATs multiple times. Instead of doing that, because when I was applying, you know, the schools would see like the number of official SATs you took. I would just not do that and just take practice exams that were released online until you feel comfortable, and then just go and take the SAT. And something I didn't realize when I was applying to college was that I didn't, prior to my senior year, I didn't know about these subject tests, which were a requirement for the school I was applying to. So there are SAT subject tests in different disciplines, like chemistry, biology, history, and sometimes schools require like 2 subject tests. And so I studied for those as well and tried to take them. Yeah, and another like extremely useful thing that I found was visiting schools. I don't know if people can do this right now because of COVID, but I think visiting schools in person and talking to the faculty and talking to current students will really make your application essay sound really genuine and like you really considered where you want to go to school. If you can talk about like what you did on campus and why you want to go to school with these people and what classes excite you the most. Yeah, I think those are my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. I know that for those of you, Bahar, did you graduate? Bahar Buzarjamir, did you graduate this year also? Is this your first year at Yale?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so people who, so Roya's advice is exactly on the money, but the people who graduated during COVID, they had a slightly different experience because subject tests were not offered. It was actually really hard to take SATs, but hopefully starting from, I think, I'm not sure subject tests are coming back, but SATs are becoming optional at some schools. And I don't know if any of you three, the recent grads, ended up taking the SAT this year or not, but that's still, I think, depending on the participants, depending on what year you are going to, if you're a senior this year or you have a couple more years, things are still shifting in the SAT space. I would say, from what I've heard, the subject tests are not coming back. They were fantastic for kind of showcasing your strengths, but they are not coming back necessarily. But the SAT optional is something that you should consider, even if the school says it's optional. That's from what I hear. I don't know. I would be interested in knowing if Bahar and Kian took SAT this year, or they just went with the test optional choice. Anybody jump in?
I didn't take the SAT my year, but I think that was like one of my biggest regrets going into like the college admission process. I think even if schools right now are saying it's optional, I would strongly recommend that you like try to take it, or like Roya said, like study and take it, because it's like such a new thing that it's optional, that if you do submit a test score, it really like does put you apart from other applicants. And that's kind of the goal of like applying to college, is like out of a pool of like 50,000 applicants, being like someone that stands out to the like admission team. And what the other thing that I was going to say is, adding on to Roya, is like visiting schools is also super helpful. I think I started making a list of the colleges that I was interested in the beginning of my junior year, end of my sophomore year. And after that, like during my junior year before COVID hit, I tried to visit as many as I could during breaks, like the ones in California with my parents, just to show the school that I'm interested. And that's a thing that a lot of schools look at, is demonstrated interest. And that helps a lot in showing them that you are gonna, if you get accepted to the school, you'll go to the school, which is what they look for a lot of times. So I think starting early is super helpful, and like starting your essay like ideas early on, and like getting them read by your teachers, maybe English teachers or your parents or older kids that you know that are in college, is super helpful. Just getting as much like opinion and advice as you can.
Thank you. Bahar or Kian, do you have anything else about college visit or SAT? What did you do with SAT this year?
Sure. Yeah, it was a similar situation for me. I had spent my time preparing in my junior year and sophomore year, preparing for the SAT. And then after COVID had hit, all the facilities around me closed. And each time I registered for the next session, it would be closed again. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to take the SAT. Same thing with the subject test. But definitely with it being optional, it's still a good practice to take it, like about how I mentioned before, to stand out amongst other students. Yeah, as far as college visits go, I unfortunately wasn't able to do many because I had planned to do college visits, but then COVID hit. So I was very limited in the amount of colleges I was able to go to. And when I had visited colleges, they weren't allowing students to walk around campus due to COVID restrictions. But still, definitely it's a good practice to get into, not only just like to stand out, but to get a feel of the area and what you're looking for as far as the campus goes. Because when you have all these choices, it's good to be definite in your choice and understand what exact thing is fitting for you.
Yeah, I'll just say I was only able to take the SAT once, I think October of junior year. And I was planning to take it again, but yeah, COVID hit, so I wasn't able to. Um, but in terms of like college visits, I also like wasn't able to do it. So I think like what I did was mostly just watch like videos on YouTube, and they did a lot of like virtual tours that were kind of helpful. But in terms of like the SAT in general, I would say like it is, if it's optional, I would recommend taking it, just because it's like for like admissions officers, I think it's hard to compare someone with a test to someone without a test when they usually have like a range they're looking for. But in terms of like the application as a whole, the SAT itself isn't like a big part of it. Like essays are a lot more important. So if you don't end up taking the SAT, I know a lot of my friends weren't able to, and they still got into like good schools. So it's not like the end of the world. It's just like a number that doesn't really well like encapsulate your intelligence.
Great, thank you. There is a question in chat that's pointing to one of the Bahars. I'm guessing Bahar B. But before we get to that, let me ask one other question on the subject of SAT. So we talked about the subject tests. We talked about SAT, but I haven't heard anything about ACT. And I want to know if anybody, at least when you were kind of prepping and figuring out what test, maybe you didn't take the test, or maybe you only didn't have a chance to take a different test. But maybe if you know, if you could share what is the difference between the two for people who haven't looked into this yet, and how would one decide which test to take? That might be helpful.
I can go. I took the ACT once, weirdly, in like 8th grade for some reason. I don't really know why, but in terms of the difference, the ACT is a lot shorter on time. So I felt like really rushed to get through the sections, and the ACT also has a science section that the SAT doesn't. And I would say like the ACT science section is kind of weird. It's hard to study for it. It kind of asks random questions, not really in like one specific subject of science, like kind of covering all science. So personally, I really preferred the SAT. I felt a lot more comfortable with the time length, and there also wasn't the math section. But I would say definitely just try and take both at some point to see which you feel more comfortable with, because I know a lot of people prefer ACT. But yeah, that was my experience.
Thank you. Anybody else has experience with ACT?
Yeah, I had for me personally, in my decision between taking the SAT or ACT, tutoring facility that I mentioned before, C2 Education, gave me practice tests for both. And from there, I was able to see which one I prefer more. And like Bahar mentioned earlier, the ACT was definitely more fast-paced, and I preferred the SAT because of that. But both have their benefits. Some other things to mention about the ACT, you can retake sections as opposed to the SAT, where you have to retake the test as a whole. And also with the ACT, I think they don't have a essay section at all, while the SAT is optional now. But schools might prefer if you take the essay section as opposed to not taking the essay section at all with the SAT. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. There is a question about Ivy League schools, especially, and a given SAT score. These questions are, I mean, I don't know, Bahar, you're welcome to jump in. I don't know enough about Ivy admission process. Roya might also know about this. I will let you guys take the answer because the question is geared to you, but my general response in these is that these numbers by themselves don't tell the whole story, and you really need to work on a full package. So I keep hearing of students who have really high scores and don't get into those schools, and I hear about people who don't have perfect scores and get to the school. So I don't know if anybody, at least, Bahar, going to an Ivy, or you might have experience on this, if you have anything to add to this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think the SAT is a really big part of the application in terms of what like admissions officers consider, and with it becoming more optional in a lot of schools, I think slowly the SAT will be phased out, hopefully. But I wouldn't worry about that test score. I think that's still like competitive. I think that's above average still, so that's like still a great score. They like the keyword for all like admissions officers is like they take a holistic approach, which means that they like they look at your application as a whole. So they look at, your like club activities and extracurriculars, and definitely the essays are a big part of it. So I would say definitely still apply to Ivies. That's still a great score, and the SAT in general just isn't a big part of the application process, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think Bahar has a way more up-to-date opinion on this. And I agree with what she said. I will say though, as Bahar said, like these tests aren't great measurements of intelligence or anything like that. So something I learned was I started off with a not a great score. And then I learned that if you practice, you can actually like learn how, like what sort of questions they ask. And so it's really just, it's rather than a mark of intelligence, it's like more like, how much did you practice? Like how much access did you have to these test books or whatever? So if you want to raise your score for some reason, I would just suggest practicing. I thought it was really weird to practice for an exam because I never had to do that in high school. It's like running or something. But yeah, apparently practice really helps, especially with timing, because the exam for me was really fast. So if you are interested in raising your score for some reason, I'd suggest to just practice and see it like detached from how smart you are, anything like that.
I completely agree with that statement as well. Okay, so you guys, this was not on my list of questions, and I think that would require sort of its own session altogether. But I guess let me see how I can ask this question. So you all talked about the holistic picture of the applicant, right? So this is one of those things that's really hard for families who are going through this process, because it's not well defined, and it kind of depends on every kid and every situation, and you don't have a yardstick that you can measure yourself, unlike a test that you can kind of prep for and get there. If you were to think about what do you think was an important aspect of your personal application? What was the one or two things that you did in high school that you think made you stand out for your full package? And if you don't want to answer the question, that's fine. But it would be like, I would love to know if you did something that's not what typically a high school student does, that kind of makes you stand out. That might be helpful for people to hear. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I really do think that requires a lot of expertise and a lot of different experiences that comes from everybody. But if you were to kind of just say, I'm glad I did this in high school, I'm glad I spent X number of hours doing something, what would that be?
I think for me, one thing that really did help me was like being involved in the Iranian American community, like in Seattle. I think like I worked like numbers of hours on Qanun, as you know, and I like talked about that in my college application. And I related like I tried to relate like a lot of my essays to what I had done in high school. And throughout high school, like with the whole like Iranian American community thing, I also like had a lot of clubs that I started on the side that had to do with like girls' education, things like that throughout the world. And so I think that's what helped me a lot, is relating, like by doing that, I related it to my essays. And so it showed that I had a couple things that I focused like really well on throughout high school and like was committed to throughout high school. And I think that helped a lot. Like that's one thing that a lot of colleges look for, is showing commitment to something, either whether it's a sport, it's a club, like anything. So I think that was one thing that helped me a lot through the application.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree. I think like I wasn't really like diverse in all my extracurriculars, but I think the admissions officers could see how like passionate I was about the things I did and how much I cared about it. I say like, I don't know if it's typical or not, but I think like I did like a lot of grassroots activism, like locally in our Olympia Lacey community. I did a lot of like climate activism, things along that line that I truly cared about. And I think that's what made my essays stand out, because they could see like my clear interests. So I would say like, rather than going for quantity of extracurriculars and clubs, go for quality, because I think that shines more than the amount you do, but just like how much time you spent doing things and how much like you cared about it.
Yeah, I agree with both Bahars. I think quality over quantity is definitely very important. So I wanted to do biology. So I did a lot of, so when I was in high school, I joined a college genetic engineering research team at University of Washington. And And I did that for 2 years, and then I started my own lab. And so I think it was just a lot of like, I did a lot of like technical work in high school. And I guess I didn't realize that you could just like go to colleges and join their clubs, even though you don't go to the college. So if anyone is interested in doing that, you might want to try it out. Something that I'm really happy I did was join this thing called iGEM, which is the International Genetically Engineered Machines Competition. And there's probably, like, if anyone's into biotech, there's probably an iGEM team near you. But if you want, I can like talk to people if you're interested in biotech, because that really, really helped me. And I know a lot of the students on the research team I started also went to a lot of really good schools, and they mentioned the iGEM competition as like a big deal for them. So yeah, if anyone's interested in that. And I definitely focused on that. I did not do like a bunch of things. I just did a few things that I really cared about too.
Yeah, as for me, it's definitely, I agree with the same sentiment that everyone else shared. Having opportunities where you can display leadership roles is definitely what colleges like to look for the most within applications. Bonus points if those relate to your major, as that shows you're invested within a specific field and you're dedicated to this, and that's why you should be accepted into this specific area. For me, I hadn't created opportunities where I had leadership roles. Instead, I participated in competitions and internships around the area that were related to the field of computer science. So I had this Microsoft held coding competition and an internship in Bellevue at this robotic process automation company called UiPath. And then in addition to this, another thing you can do to help shine, sometimes if for whatever reason you're not accepted to a certain university, usually these universities have an appeals process where you can add additional things that you had done in between the time of applying and now you're applying again. So while showing interest that you want this school specifically, you're also able to highlight things that you're able to do in the time in between. And for me, I had also done additional internship opportunities and job roles and side projects that I had held, which helped me get into, for example, the University of Washington. So that's also a good thing to do.
Thank you. That's great feedback. There's a question that's also related to one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I heard both Bahars kind of expressed that they were, I think you both said that you were undeclared or you were interested in business, but you were undeclared. I can't remember what Bahar B said. But I want to ask about that. So sometimes high school students come out of high school like Roya, knowing exactly what, or also Kian, knowing exactly what they want to study. And sometimes, that's not the case, and that's completely okay not to know what you want to study. So I want you to talk about that. Perhaps if you were sure and you knew what you wanted to do, obviously that's easy. You fill the application and you say, I want to study biology. But if you don't know and you are kind of in between, or you're still completely undecided, or you may be undecided with like interest in some particular field, maybe talk about that experience. How do you go about approaching the application and not being, because if you know what you want, you can also put that in your essay and strengthen your essay. But if you don't, then that aspect is taken away from your essay writing. So maybe talk about that if you were not exactly sure what you were interested in, and or what you know about this experience of being an undecided college major.
I think like it's really common to be undecided. A lot of my friends are, so you're definitely like not alone in not knowing like what you want to do. I think most colleges don't make you declare your major till like end of sophomore year, so there's a lot of time to figure out your interests. And like when looking at schools, I guess just like if you have like a field in mind but not a specific major, maybe look at what kind of opportunities the school has in that specific field. If you have no idea, which is completely fine, just like overall, like maybe like the retention rate for the school, or just like in general how it stands, just like overall, is it like a good school in terms of education and like how students respond to that, or if it has like a good like teacher to student ratio, things like that aren't like necessarily related to the major. And I'd also say like, even if you're like undecided, if you have like something that you're somewhat interested in, you could still put that down and then completely change your mind. Like no one's holding you to what you said in your application. I know a lot of my friends, and me too, I've like switched my mind multiple times about what I want to major in. So you could just like put down whatever you're like slightly interested in, and then completely change your mind later.
That was the same for me. I applied to the business school at most of the schools that I applied to, just because I like that was the track that I kind of was interested in. And I know for a lot of schools, it's important to look into their transfer process into those like certain schools, like the business school or like school of arts, because that can be hard a lot of times. And so I applied to the business school, but I just applied undeclared in business. So I haven't picked a track yet of like management, marketing, or finance. And I think most schools are pretty good about giving you time. Like, for example, at Santa Clara, we have until like, I think our junior year to decide which track we want to go on. And so, like Bahar said, it's like completely fine if you don't know what you want to do. I mean, you're also 18 years old, so you might not know what you want to do with the rest of your life yet. So, and a lot of people like change majors, that's super common, or like end up getting a minor in what their like other interests are. So there's always like a lot of options, and that's also a good thing to look into on like school websites, or ask your college counselors at school just before you apply to certain schools.
Yeah, and also there are some schools where you have to compete for a major. I think those are like some public schools are like that, but there are other schools where you can go to whatever major you want. So when selecting schools, you might want to choose a school that allows you more freedom in that realm. And also, you could use this as an advantage. Like I know the school I go to has this thing called core, where they force you to take like all of the engineering courses, or all like courses in biology, even if you're going to be a mechanical engineer, like courses in chemistry. So you could just say, I want to do everything, and then go to a school that makes everyone like do everything, I guess. So like so I came in thinking I wanted to do biology, but then I ended up being a mathematical and computational biology major, which is like everything at once. So yeah, so don't see it as a downside. I think a great part of college is this exploring. Like a really good college, I think allows its students to explore their interests and like sort of nourishes their minds. So you should go to a school that has a really good reputation in education specifically, and like all of the majors are really good. Not just one is really good, like you like all of them to some degree, so you have more freedom. So I think it's exciting to not know what you want to do, and I think college is a great way to figure that out. So
if I may had my previous professor hat for a moment, I want to kind of emphasize that as well. I want to say, first of all, if you kind of know what direction you want to go, if you are interested in sciences or you're interested in engineering, I would say the first year of classes are pretty much the same. You may lose or gain a class here or there. You may take a class that doesn't count towards your major, but it will count as a general elective at some point. So it's not the case that you are going to lose a ton of, you know, if you are unsure and you kind of decide at the end of their first year or sometime in your second year, you're not going to lose a lot. I had a lot of students that would come and want to become a computer science major in their junior year, and they didn't have the calculus classes ready, or they hadn't taken calculuses because they thought they were going to be an arts major, for example. That transition, if you wait that long, is a little rockier. It's not as easy. But I would say, let's say if you are interested in sciences and engineering, everybody has to take biology 101 or 1000, whatever the first introductory biology classes, or a chemistry class. Everybody has to take calculus classes. Most majors have to take linear algebra if you're staying within that kind of area. If you want to go to business school, the first year of business classes are probably the same across all of the tracks. So it's okay. It's completely okay to be undeclared. It's okay to explore and see what kind of sticks with you. As an undergrad in my last semester, I took a class in anthropology, and if it wasn't, I loved that course, and if it wasn't my last semester, I may have minored in anthropology, and I wish I'd taken that course earlier. So you don't want to be in that position. You want to be in a position where you get to choose and you have the time to explore. So that, keep that in mind. But what Roya said is absolutely correct in terms of more competitive schools. So for example, at the University of Washington, it's a lot harder. There is some, I don't know, they're changing their process every year. So I don't actually know what the current process is. But as of a couple of years ago, if you wanted to come in later, it was a lot harder to come in and generally the first couple of years to prep to get into major was very difficult for computer science. They have changed that process right now. I think they are doing admission as freshmen, so that makes things a little bit less hectic. But I also want you to keep in mind that in my perspective, college education, really undergraduate education, is about two things. It's about learning, teaching you how to do time management and teaching you how to get along with people and work with people. The major is kind of secondary. Yes, it puts you on track towards a career, and that's important. And that's hopefully something that you're interested in doing for a long time in your life. But at the same time, I would say the most important takeaway from college is the time management and learning to work with people, because those are skills that stay with you and are really, really critical in your success. So again, if you are undecided, don't worry too much about it. You have time to explore. And there is a lot of flexibility built into the curriculum as you come in as a freshman. There is a question about IBs versus APs. Did anybody go to a school that was a IB program? No. So sorry, Nori. I would not. If I had to answer that question, I'm answering it with not with full expertise, but with minimal expertise. But I would say if I had to answer that question, I wouldn't say there is any difference. I would say that colleges are interested in seeing that your students have challenged themselves, that they've taken challenging courses and they have gone beyond what the main baseline is. And both of those IB and APs give you that opportunity. Now, AP courses, if you get 4 or 5 on the AP exam, in some colleges they give you credit, or for some courses, depending on your major, they may or may not give you credit. And I would say the biggest benefit of those credits you get out of that is not necessarily financial, because actually most colleges have a flat tuition rate. So, you take 12 or 13 or 14 credits, you pay the same tuition for that quarter or semester. So it doesn't necessarily make a huge difference. But what it does is that it gives you flexibility. So if you bring in credit for, let's say, a couple of classes as you go into college, then you have got that credit and you can go and spend that 8 or 10 credits on a new course, on a new topic that you didn't have to take. So I would say the biggest value proposition of the AP courses is to just give you flexibility with your course selection down the road. Not necessarily, a lot of people graduate earlier. If you've taken a lot of them, you can cut a year off of your education, but that's really not as common as you would think it is. It just gives you flexibility. There is a question about recommendation letters on teachers. How many recommendation letters do you need, and how do you approach that? How do you kind of look for a teacher a couple of years in advance and you think this is a good teacher for me to get a recommendation from, or how and when do you go about that process?
What I did that was kind of helpful was talking to some of the older kids that had already graduated or were like, when I was like a junior, they were seniors. And a lot of them, like from either their siblings and stuff, they knew like who was kind of known for like writing pretty good like recommendation letters and who would like put time into it. And so what I did was like talk to them and like see if I had any teachers in common. And then after that, I would go and like went through all my grades and see like which classes I did really well in. And that's like a super important part, is you want a teacher that you know is going to write good stuff about you. So you want a teacher that you succeeded in their class in. And I think they asked if you were online and you haven't met them. I asked for one of mine once school went online, and it was a teacher that had been switched. So I had another teacher before COVID, and then after COVID, it was another one. So I had to ask her for the new one. And I think if you just try from right now to build like relationships with your teachers, either if they have like, tutorials you can go to like online, going to those, or trying to like start emailing them back and forth, just so that your name is like in their head and like participating in class more, all of that just kind of helps them like know you better. And it's a little harder because of COVID to get like a personal relationship with your teacher. But I think if you just try to do those things, like little things like tutorials and emailing, it'll help a lot into like you, first of all, succeeding in the class and then later asking for a letter of rec.
That's great advice. Anybody else? Do you have to have teachers from your junior and senior year? Can you go to a teacher from your freshman, sophomore year for recommendation?
I think they like suggest that it's a more recent teacher, so probably not someone from freshman year, probably not someone from sophomore year unless you're like really close to them. I think they recommend junior year, because senior year I think is probably too late to build a connection with them since applications are right at the start. But I would also say like send out your requests early, because once like application season starts, teachers get really filled with like recommendation letters. And I emailed my 2 recommenders, I think like mid-August, so before the school year, my senior year even started, just so I was like on their radar. But yeah, definitely start early because teachers get really busy just with like normal school load, and then also letter of rec season.
Yeah, I agree with the something stated earlier. You definitely want to have teachers where you felt you did well in their class. I know for myself, there were specific qualities I wanted to be shown within my letter. For example, in math, I had talked about to my math teacher that I had wanted the specific quality of engaging within the class and trying to help other students learn the material, and that quality of being a leader. I wanted that to be shown within my essay. So I had suggested that, and I felt that that was well represented within that teacher. Another good thing to note is that for colleges that require letters of recommendation, they'll explicitly say what type of teacher they want for that letter of recommendation. So usually it's through like a humanities teacher, and then also like a math or science teacher. So make sure you have certain teachers picked out for those 2 categories, and choosing the best teacher for that. As far as building relationships with teachers during COVID, I had a similar problem where I felt that the teachers that I had interacted with during COVID, which was during my junior year, and then also for my entire senior year, I felt like I didn't build any strong relationships or strong interactions. But the advice given earlier, so maintaining email communication or trying to participate as actively as you can within class is definitely good advice. And yeah, make sure that you're trying to express an interest in having that letter of recommendation earlier on, because as stated before, certain teachers, if they're a good teacher, definitely there are other students that want to have that same teacher to write for them. So it's good to engage with them early on and make sure you're in their mind before writing any other letter of recommendation.
Great, thank you. One more question. You can answer this question about in terms of how many your own case, or you can just kind of give a ballpark figure. I'm not trying to be. If you're uncomfortable answering the question exactly, you don't have to answer it exactly. But I want to know. People usually ask how many schools to apply to, and I have an answer that I give to that question that doesn't actually answer the question in terms of the actual specific numbers. But in general, what would you say? What is your experience? What did you see? What seems to be the practice these days? Anyone?
Oh, sorry, I didn't catch the question. Experience with what? Sorry.
How many universities should a person consider applying to? Like, when you think about Washington State, there's a few. There's lots of schools in California. So if you even go by geographic location, if you live in California, you have a lot more around you versus here, right? So let me answer the question the way I usually answer, and then if you guys want to throw a number in there, please go ahead. I would generally say you want to come up with a list of schools that you're interested in. That list is going to be longer than the number of schools that you're going to apply for. So let's say you end up applying for 4 schools, you want to have a list that has 10 schools on it. If you end up applying for 10 schools, you want to have a list that has 15 schools on it. And I would say generally you want to research these schools and kind of categorize them to your reach school, the schools that are kind of hard to get into, but it would be really nice if you do get into them and you would be thrilled to go there. And medium range schools that are schools that you will be, you have a pretty good chance of getting into, but they're still going to challenge you, and they're going to be you will be feeling good about getting in there. And you definitely want to have 1 or 2 schools in a place where it's your safety zone, that you feel comfortable you're going to get in, and that's the approach you want to go. If your goal is to go to a 4-year college, it's completely reasonable to say that, okay, I'm going to change this formula, and if I don't get into the school that's my top school, I'm going to go to community college for a couple of years and just kind of build up a portfolio. And especially if you go to a community college in a state, usually the community colleges have relationships with the universities in the state, so you do get a good chance of getting and transferring into the university in your junior year after you've completed your associate degree. So that's definitely an option. But in general, I want to kind of get a sense, what do you hear from your friends? Do people apply to 5 schools? Do they apply to 10 schools? What's the running number these days?
When I was, Bahar, do you want to go? Or?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay, because I'm 3 years out, so, or 4 years out. So, but I applied to like 5 schools, which is very low. I did early decision, and what I did was I really discovered the school that I really, really, really wanted to go to, and tried really hard to get into that school. And I think like not applying to a bunch allowed me to focus and visit that school and think about it some more. But I think my twin applied to like 10 or 13 or some number like that, some 15. I know some people who apply to a lot of schools and get into a bunch of really good ones. So
Yeah, I was kind of similar in that sense. So I actually only ended up applying to 5 because I did early action at Yale. So I found out that I got in like December, and like all the regular decision deadlines are like January 1st. So then I didn't apply to any other schools. But I think I had about 12 or 13 originally on my list, which I think is like pretty normal. I would say like, yeah, 5 is kind of on the low side, but just like depends how you feel like you would get in or not, like how many safeties you decide to do. I know some people who did like upwards of 20, which I would say is too much. It just depends how much work you want to put into it, because it is a lot of essay writing. But I would say like 10 to 15 is pretty normal now, I think. That's like what my friends said about.
I would say 20 is a full-time job. So I don't recommend that many, honestly.
I was one of those people that did upwards of 20. I think it was just like, what my mistake was I like put way too many safety schools on there. And I think I just went into the college application process, like really scared of, oh my gosh, I'm not going to get into this school or that school. Like, so I think what, you guys said at the start of having like a certain amount of safety schools, having a certain amount of reach schools, having a certain amount of target schools is really important. So you're not like applying to way too many reach schools or way too many safeties. And I think, like you said, yeah, it was a lot of time that I didn't need to be spending on essays that I was spending on essays. And what you have to keep in mind is every college application, like not only do you have your college essay that you submit, but you have like 3 or 4 essays for a lot of them that you have to write separately. So it's like 50 essays at once. So it's not a very good idea to apply to that many. But I would say my friends, like I think the most I heard out of my friends was around 17, and like on the lower side it was 5 or 6. But the ones that did split it up between safety, target, and reach schools had like the easiest time writing applications, and they got into good schools. So it's not like it took away from them.
Yeah, for me, initially, I started out with maybe like a list of 13 schools, and I had also categorized it, like everyone has mentioned before, about reach, target, and safety schools. And initially, I was kind of afraid because most of my schools were reach schools. But it's good to make sure you have a good amount of target and safety, and then also have like a good amount of reach. But as mentioned before, you could typically transfer into a more competitive school later on after having 2 years of maybe like a safety school. And I know, especially with computer science, that's been here at UW, people like to take 2 years at a different school and then transfer in later on. So that's definitely a recommended strategy for college. As for how other people, how many schools they took, or how many places they applied to, it definitely ranged from some people taking like 3 applications to others doing upwards of 20. And I would say a good golden number is, yeah, around that 10, or just like not over 20, but above 10, maybe around there. And definitely with that dynamic list, you want to change it throughout the year, maybe adding schools or removing schools later on to make it easier on yourself. But also a good thing with my applications, at least, the bulk of the schools that I wanted to go to were UCs. And with the UC application, all of the essays are for all the schools. So you could just write 3 essays, and then it would apply to like 8 schools. So that handled with most of the applications I had to deal with.
Those are great. There is a question in the chat about scholarship. I want to ask that, but before that, I want to ask Bahar. B mentioned the early action, early decision. So that's a topic that's really important and useful to some people. So maybe Bahar, if you can just explain what that is. What is the difference? A lot of people get confused about what is the difference between the two. If you can answer that, and then maybe talk about your experience. I don't know if anybody else used that option, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference between early action and early decision is that for I think most schools, early decision is binding. So if you apply
Actually, backtrack, explain what they are, because there may be people
Okay.
who don't know anything about them.
Okay, yeah. So for every school has a regular decision date, which is like all applicants are in that pool. I think basically most schools are January 1st for a regular decision, but then a lot of schools also offer students to apply early. So your decision, like the application due date, is also earlier. A lot of them are in November. And so that's like a smaller pool of students. And like the reason you would do early action or early decision to a school is like if that's like your top choice, or like you really want to go to that school, it helps show that, that's like the school you want to go to. And people say that it might help with your like admission rate. I don't really know. But yeah, so like that's the difference between like applying early, you have the earlier deadline, versus regular later deadline. But early like shows that you're really interested in that school, basically. So then between early action and early decision is binding. So if you get into that school in their early decision process, then you have to like withdraw your applications from all other schools, and like basically you like have to go to that school. Like I think like if you can afford it and like that works out, you basically have to go to that school. Versus early action depends on the school. Some of them are restrictive, but early action isn't binding. So if you get an early action to that school, you don't have to go. Like you can still look at your other options, look at your other like financial aid packages, and still figure things out. And then with like early action and early decision, you could get deferred. So basically, if you get deferred, then you're just put into the application pool for all like regular decision, if that makes sense. So you can still like get into that school, but they'll just like consider you with everyone else that applies during regular decision. And so for me, I guess when I was like looking at schools, early decision was kind of too big of a commitment for me, because I wanted to like compare like financial aid packages and just like other offers from other schools. So I did early action to Yale, and Yale is one of the schools that has the restrictive early action policy. So some schools, if you apply early action to them, you can also apply early action to like all other schools. But with Yale specifically, I applied early action, and so that only let me apply early action to other public schools, but not private schools. So if you're interested in that, I would definitely say look at each school you're interested in and what their policies are around early action. But I think I would highly suggest doing early action for schools or early decision if you like really know which school you want to go to, just because you find out early. So I found out in December. Most people found out what school they got into in like March. So I had like the reassurance before even the end of my first semester of senior year, which was really nice. But yeah, I would say like that's the big difference. And I would suggest looking into the different policies, because each school is kind of different in what they allow and what they don't allow.
Any other comments from the panel on early action, early decision?
I applied early decision to my school, and that's the one I got into. So I do, part of me might wish that like, oh, I wish I had some more, it feels a little odd that it's binding. But it also kind of felt good to be done with everything before everyone else, because you can just relax while everyone else is waiting for decisions. So it can be worth it to apply early and know you're in a school and not have to stress for the rest of the year. Not that you should be stressing in the first place, but that's what I liked about it.
Great. There was a question about scholarships. And if you, I think the question was asking if you applied for any scholarships. I want to just clarify something and then I let you guys chime in. So there are two kinds of scholarships. There are the merit-based scholarships that based on your grades and your accomplishments, and then there is the need-based scholarship. So these two are different pots of money, different processes. In some schools, usually you apply through the federal financial aid application. That kind of in most schools that considers you for both merit and need-based scholarships, and you just fill one application and they will channel this appropriately. There are additional private scholarships or things that are not part of the federal financial aid. Some schools will require a separate application for that. Some schools consider your FAFSA application to be the application for those as well, and just kind of pull it out and consider it. The only other thing I would say on that is that private universities tend to be a lot more expensive, but don't be fooled by the price tag that you see on the website as to how expensive they are. If that's a school that you're interested in, or it's you would be thrilled to go, it's just the only problem is that it's super expensive. I recommend still apply for scholarships. They will almost always give some kind of a scholarship to students. That scholarship package value will depend on your accomplishment and on your family's needs. But I can tell you from experience that it varies, that rate changes from year to year, but most private universities have anywhere between 85 to 95% of students receiving some kind of a scholarship package. So you don't really know what your final price tag is until you get your scholarship letter. Essentially, that kind of explains what that is. Anybody else, if you have anything to add, please.
I think one thing that also I did was, if you really want to go to a school and they didn't give you enough scholarship money, you can email their like financial team, or I think I emailed just their admissions office, and I showed them proof of like other schools that were kind of within like the same acceptance rate range, and how like they gave me more money. Like you kind of take a picture of like the letter and send it to them and forward it to them. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll match that. So they'll raise the scholarship money that they gave you and match the amount that another school gave you. So if you kind of have to like play them and, like email them and keep going until, they give you a little more money if you really want to go there. And like the problem might be the money. But I think outside of that, like after you're done applying to colleges, I would just look online for whatever like scholarships you can find and start applying to those. I like always, my parents would always tell me like the college application process doesn't end when you like finish applying to colleges. You can still like go and like apply to scholarships, just anything. I think there was like a duct tape one where like if you made a duct tape wallet, you like get a certain amount of money. So it's like you can look online and you'll definitely find a bunch. And by then like you'll get like more and more money, and on top of that you'll get the merit-based scholarships that the school gave you.
Yeah, and just as a thought, something I regret not applying to was this thing called the Science Ambassadors Scholarship. It's offered by Cards Against Humanity. If you make a lecture, like a science lecture or something you're passionate about, and videotape it and apply, they'll give you if you win, they'll give you a full tuition scholarship, regardless of which school you go to, and it's merit-based and it's external to the school. So if you go to a really expensive school, they'll still pay for it all. Yeah, and you can apply actually, even though you're in college. You can apply before, like once you get in, you can apply for paying for your college, or if you're in college right now, you can apply for Cards Against Humanity to give you money for the rest of your years at college. So, yeah.
So that's a great point. That's an external organization offering a scholarship. It's not the university that is offering that scholarship. So there's a whole bunch of these kinds of organizations as well. And I don't have a lot of information on that, but I would say I'm sure your high school's college guidance counselors have that kind of information. So you should definitely go and talk with them to get a list. I know from when I was an undergrad student, I had a list of all of the scholarships. There was no internet at the time. I had to like actually manually on paper apply for those scholarships, but or write letters to them. We are almost at time. I have one last question for all of our panelists. Thank you again so much. I know this is a busy time of the quarter and semester for all of you. I guess I would like to just ask, what is one reflection or one advice that you might have for families? If you were to do this process again, what would you stress about or not stress about, or just anything, any kind of either reflection or advice to people who are going to go through this process in the next couple of years? It's extra credit question.
I guess I could say like advice. I would say just go for it. I never thought I would get into Yale, and I like almost wasn't going to apply. I just mostly did because one of my friends was doing it. So I like definitely did not have hopes of getting in. It was definitely a reach. But I would say don't let like the prestige of the school keep you from applying, or like don't let like imposter syndrome come in where you think you're not good enough. I would say just like believe in yourself and apply for the schools that you're actually interested in, no matter like how selective it is.
Okay, yeah, I would say a similar thing. Don't get discouraged about any step of the journey. I know, especially for myself, I have wanted to come to the UW, and initially I was accepted, but not for the major that I wanted to get accepted for, because in computer science you have to be directly admitted. And I explored my options outside of that. I was considering schools like UC Irvine, Seattle U, but still I was keeping my options open, and I submitted appeals processes. And even if I weren't be able to get into the schools after that, I still have these options open of taking 2 years within an outside school and then transferring into schools that I wanted to do. So no matter what, there's always options ahead of yourself if you want to get into that one school. And even if you're not, don't be discouraged at all, because every school you'll go to will probably give you a great foundational education to the degree you want. And after college, there's no difference between someone who goes to the University of Washington or Bellevue College and is transferred into Stanford, for example. So don't be discouraged about any step of the journey. That's what I would say.
Kind of adding on to that, I would say that rejection is a part of the college process. Like obviously no one, or I think very few people would get into every single school they apply to. And so don't, kind of like what Kian said, don't let that discourage you. I know I let that happen a lot. And like, if you get rejection after rejection, like there's always something out there. And you will, like, this is what everyone says, but it's true. Like you're going to end up where you're supposed to end up. If a school doesn't want you, then you probably wouldn't have been happy going there anyways, because they accept people based on like who they think is going to fit in at their school, and like not just anyone. So I think like making sure that you understand that rejection is a part of the process, and that in the end, it'll all work out and you'll end up where you'll be happy and where you want to end up.
And yeah, I think one thing to focus on is that like you can always learn really cool things regardless of where you are. And some people that I know, they went to schools they didn't want to go to, but they came out as really good scientists, and it doesn't, because they took their learning into their own hands. Like one of my friends, she was amazing. Like I thought she'd get into all of the schools she applied to. She didn't get into the school she wanted to go to. And then she just went and became this like amazing bioengineering researcher and got like the Goldwater Scholarship, which is like the most famous scholarship for scientists, and then got into Stanford and MIT and Harvard for grad school and all of these things. So it's really about, I guess your learning is in your own hands. School is just where you learn. So I think you're all gonna do great, and don't be stressed. Take care of yourselves. I remember how stressed I was at this time, but you guys got this.
So Roya, I have one more question for you, and then we're going to wrap it up. Can you just maybe briefly talk about liberal art colleges? We talk about public school, private school, but that's another category, and maybe you can share your experience and why you chose one, and that might be of interest to some of our listeners.
Yeah, so my school is very engineering oriented, but it is a liberal arts school, and they require you to take humanities courses. So I chose a liberal arts school because of the low student to teacher ratio. So you get a lot of attention from professors if you go to at least the school I went to, the sort of liberal arts school that I went to. And where I think this shines is in biology labs, or in like some sort of like laboratory environment where like if you go to some big research institution, like you will barely talk to your professor in a bio lab, and you're kind of, sometimes you can be feel like a robot when you're doing biological protocols. But like at my school, I feel like the students were really involved in the research and in the research decisions. And I think people learned a lot more by doing that. And another thing is that I think the humanities courses were really enlightening as well. They forced me to sort of think outside of the STEM mindset, which can be pretty constricted. Like I would take some multivariable calculus class or some linear algebra class, and then I'd go and do a computational photography class where we would make these projections off of different walls and do art. And I think that really helped change my perspective on different fields. So yeah, and I guess an example of how a liberal arts school is really cool is that so my school's really small, and something that happened at my school that I couldn't see happening anywhere else is that like one of my bio professors just like let me like have a lab in the school, which is like a pretty big piece of space. It's just kind of crazy, and I don't think that would happen at a big school with like graduate students and other things. So yeah, that's my experience going to a liberal arts school.
Great, thank you. And I have one last comment for everybody. I want to say from my own personal experience, like I said, undergraduate education is about kind of helping you grow and learn to work with people. And like I think Kian also mentioned this, it doesn't matter where you go to college. You can go to any college, the best college, the medium college, the safety school college that you apply to. If you put effort into what you are doing and you do what is supposed to be done in college, put effort and really kind of want to learn and build relationships, you're going to get what you're going to get out of that. It's a different story if you want to go to graduate school, if you want to go become a doctor or you want to get a PhD, that becomes a lot more important where you go for your graduate school. But your undergraduate, if you do well in your undergraduate school, it doesn't matter where you graduated from. If you've done well, if you have good relationship with your professors, you can go to the best graduate schools as well. If you want to go get a job after undergraduate, it's all about your skill sets. It's really not as much about where you graduated from. So again, don't stress about it. Just go for it. It will all work out. So with that, I don't see any other question in chat. want to be mindful of everybody's time. Really thank you everyone for participating, and thanks to all of our panelists for taking the time to do this on your own time. And thank you for all of the people who participated. It's nice to see the interest in the community. If you're interested in more programs related to this, feel free to contact us. I'm super happy to organize additional panels. It can be more targeted on specific aspects of the process or the experiences. So please let us know what you're interested in, and we'll help make that happen. And thank you